Welcome back to our presentation on the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay. We began up in Baltimore and came down to the northern neck in the first part. In this latter part, we're going to focus on the southern part of the western shore, the Tidewater area. Everything from Colonial Williamsburg down to Norfolk, Virginia. Thank you for joining us once again. I hope you enjoy. We're now going to come almost down to the end of the Chesapeake Bay in an area called the Tidewater area of Virginia. An area that attracts tourists and one that has numerous military installations. We're going to visit three locations to start with: Yorktown, Williamsburg, and Jamestown. Those squiggly lines connecting those three places delineates the Colonial Parkway. I had family that lived just outside of Williamsburg along the Colonial Parkway. And I have driven the Parkway and Carol and I have driven the Parkway, and we've ridden our bikes on the Parkway many times. Our first stop is Yorktown, the site of a famous battle. The American Continental Army troops led by George Washington and Lafayette, along with some French Army troops, won the battle over the British Army and Navy. The British Army was commanded by General Cornwallis. As this slide says, this was the last major land battle of the American Revolutionary War. General Cornwallis, as a result of this battle, was captured as well as his army. And the result was it prompted the British government to negotiate an end to the Revolutionary War. We now journey along the Colonial Parkway headed towards Williamsburg. It's a spot that I know well because just off to the right about 3/4 of a mile is where my uncle lived. Williamsburg was founded in 1632 and it was known as the Middle Plantation. It became a fortified settlement, meaning there were a fort that had wood all around it to protect it. High on ground between the James and the York rivers. The city served as capital of the colony and later the Commonwealth of Virginia from 1699 to 1780. And along with folks in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, it became a center for political events leading to the American Revolutionary War. Colonial Williamsburg is an historical landmark and a living museum. Living is, you just don't go and see buildings and nice interiors, but you'll see people doing reenactment, much like St. Mary's, but a lot more of them, doing all sorts of things in houses or on the streets, or as you'll later see, in gardens. Williamsburg core streets is this one, the Duke of Gloucester, as well as the Palace Green. Those buildings that survived up until the 1930s were restored. If they had any additional things added to them that were not on them during the early 1800s. They were removed. Unfortunately, many buildings no longer existed in the 1930s when the Reconstruction began. And so considerable research needed to be done to identify where the foundations of buildings were, what they looked like, what their interiors looked like, and reconstructed them so that they looked identical to the way they looked in the early 1800s. Most people walk around Williamsburg. That's after you could take a bus from the visitor center to the restored area. But you can also go around in style in a colonial style or era carriage. If you're there during the summer, I encourage you to go to the Village Green before 5 p.m. because that's when they fire the cannons. Sometimes the reenactors will invite a youth to come up and be part of the contingent firing the cannons. They don't get to fire the cannons, but they get to do the countdown. And this is a picture looking south towards the Governor's Palace, and this is the Duke of Gloucester Street. There are homes on the other side, and you can walk back and forth. But remember, there are carriages with horses going up and down that road, so be careful where you step. This is Brewton Parish Church. It is located in the restored area of Williamsburg. It was established in 1674, the consolidation of two previous parishes, and remains a very active Episcopal church today. Carol and I were once walking down by the church. We noticed a wedding was going on. This was a very, very, very long time ago, and the wedding was of David Brinkley. Some of you may remember that name. He was a prominent national newscaster, and this wedding that we saw was his. Again, that was a very long time ago. As I mentioned previously, the best way to see Williamsburg is by walking and going behind the houses to see the wonderful gardens. Gardens you can walk through. There may be a brick walkway. This walkway here is mostly broken up clamshells. The gardens are all of flowers that would have been familiar to the colonists. Likewise, the gardens are planted and cultivated the same way the colonists planted their gardens, their vegetable gardens. If you're lucky enough to go to Williamsburg just prior to Christmas, it is a magical time to be there. Go there at night. These are fire stands in which they put kindling and light them. The smell is great from the fires, but they light the way going up and down the streets. The smell of the wood burning combined with the decorations that are up provide an almost magical time to be in Williamsburg. All of the decorations are natural. You'll not find any artificial decorations either outside the houses or inside the houses. That is a real pineapple, and those are real apples as well as leaves off one of the trees. Every time I look at this, I always think they must have done something to the apples to coat them. I'm sure the colonists didn't, but I'm sure today they do, to protect the birds from going and pecking at the apples. Maybe not. This is one of the wreaths you might see on a doorway. Take a close look. You might want to try that next Christmas for your door. Just outside the restored area, it's actually in between, just off, I'll just leave it as, it's just off the restored area and in between the campus of William and Mary College or University. There are stores. The stores are all new, but they were created and they look like fitting into an 18th century type of building. But this is one of my favorite areas. You see those benches? I have warmed them on numerous occasions. It was a great place to sit, usually with a dog, and watch or people watch. I love to people watch. Meanwhile, Carol would be enjoying going into the various stores. I highly recommend, there's a Scottish store there with sale for kilts and all sorts of Scottish treats, shall we say. We moved down the Colonial Parkway to Jamestown. As the slide says, the first permanent English colony in Virginia. While Jamestown, if you go there today, is not as reconstructed as Williamsburg, it is still a very historic site. It was established in May 1607 by English settlers. Within days of landing, the colonists were attacked by local Indians, and they were repeatedly attacked over the years. To defend themselves, the newcomers spent weeks constructing what this drawing is showing, a wooden fort. It was within this wooden fort that was England's first permanent colony in North America. The key word there is permanent colony in North America. That includes the United States and Canada. But within this fort, the seeds of the future United States grew. The story of Jamestown is a dramatic and traumatic one. It was of disease, famine, and sporadic attacks by the local Indians. One particular year in 1609 through 1610 is known as the Starving Time. It took a tremendous toll on the early population. Those that survived had names that became the backbone of Virginia. Like St. Mary's City in Maryland, Jamestown today is a site of archaeological digs, which also provide insight into the early settlement of the colony. I apologize for the fuzziness of this slide. Doesn't matter. It's showing the area of what's called Hampton Roads, the Chesapeake Bay, the James River going out into the Atlantic off on the right. But what's important is not knowing the land masses. What I'm trying to show you is this is an area that is very heavy in military installations. Each one of those blue markers designates a major military site. I'm not going to visit all those military installations, but I wanted to highlight a couple of them because they're important. This is Fort Eustis. You've been to Williamsburg, and perhaps you came out and got on Interstate 64 and went south towards Norfolk. Within a few miles going south, you might have seen a sign but not paid much attention to it. That's where Fort Eustis is located. It's important to the U.S. Army, extremely important. That's because this headquarters controls the logistics required to support the U.S. Army worldwide. It's not just getting things there on the ground. There's an entity called the Military Support Transport System. They are run by civilian crews, but they're government vessels. This is the organization that controls getting those vessels loaded and to the proper place to support troops around the world. There is another command at this facility called Tradoc, Training and Doctrine Command. It used to be at a place where we'll visit next, but it has now moved to Fort Eustis. What does this command do? It oversees all the schools and training in the U.S. Army. And not just folks that go in and go to officer candidate school or to basic training. It's all the training throughout the career of military enlisted personnel and officers. But it also writes the doctrine. Doctrine is how the military fights or doesn't fight under certain circumstances. Tradoc used to be located at this place that is in the Oval, Fort Monroe. I had the privilege of going to Tradoc a number of times to give presentations at this fort. This is what it looks like. It's my favorite place to go and do briefings. Because the building that I used to give my presentation to, the grumpy old general, was over 100 years old. Fort Monroe is no longer a military installation. It is now a national park. A national park that you can visit. And if you're in the Tidewater area, I encourage you to do so. It sits at the base of a peninsula again, just across from the bases in Norfolk, Virginia. It was constructed as part of a coastal defense strategy by the Army after the War of 1812. This, you can see the structures going around the moat, and then there were cannons in the heyday that defended the fort and defended the Chesapeake Bay. It's a neat place to walk around. Near Fort Monroe, there is an Air Force base. one that adds a lot to the local economy, but it has a very important mission. If some of you have ever stopped down 15 in the area of Camp David, off to the left in the Doctrine Mountains, and you look up when the president is present at Camp David, you might hear, you won't see them, these aircraft high overhead. They're there in what is called cap to prevent a 9/11 situation of occurring, of having an aircraft, a commercial aircraft, taken over and come in and try to assassinate the president. But they also have another job. Off the coast of the United States, there is an imaginary line called the ADIZ. It's a line when an aircraft, whether it be commercial or private, is crossing it, coming into the United States. It must have a radio on board. We call it transponder. That can be interrogated, that is quizzed. Are you a friend? Are you a foe? If you don't send back a signal that designates who you are and where you're going and why you're going, you're going to be met by planes like this. And until they can establish that you are not a threat to the United States, they will stay with you. I should lay anchors away at this point because the Norfolk area and the Tidewater area is inhabited by many, many naval institutions or bases. We start with the Naval Station Norfolk, and this is Carrier Row. Notice all the carriers being home ported there. I want to point out something. Carriers go out, they go from here to the Mediterranean. It used to be the big cruise, but now they go further. They go out in the Middle East. They don't go through the Suez Canal. Sometimes that means going all the way around Africa. But they are supporting, whether they're in the Med or they come around to go into the Gulf, they are supporting U.S. operations and NATO operations in that region. When they come back to their home port in Norfolk, they usually require some maintenance and a lot of times upgrades to systems on board. When it's heavy maintenance, the contractors come in, and on that flight deck, you can see on the second carrier up from the left, there's white. Those are tents where the contractors do a lot of the maintenance and have their offices. Most of the carriers you would see, you've got to look very carefully, all have some sort of tents on them and undergoing a thing. I would point out there are different types of carriers. If you looked up at the number 4 from the left, it is not a carrier that you put fighter aircraft on board. It is a helicopter carrying carrier. This is a carrier returning to home port. It's going to go to that dock just over at the left. You'll notice that the flight deck is ringed by enlisted personnel in their dress uniforms. This is a Navy tradition coming back into home port or going into a new port. as they're overseas. These enlisted folks are excited to do this. Not all of them, but most of them. Why? Because down on that dock to the left is their families. Families that they have not seen 6 to 9 months, or in some cases, over a year. And so this will be a great homecoming. The arrow on the flight deck denotes where planes come in and land. Those catapults for taking off are up on the bow of the aircraft carrier, up to the right center. But this is where you land, and that's where there's wires are stretched across. The wires aren't taut, they give, but they're weighted and to stop you. I do this because most people think you land and you go straight down. No, you land off to the left. That means that the carrier is not directly going into the wind, but is having the wind come over that left portion of the flight deck. The naval station is not just home to carriers. All sorts of naval vessels are located here, to include submarines. Most people think about submarines being up in Connecticut, but that's not the only place that submarines are stationed. This is a hospital ship. It is extremely important. When service people are engaged in combat, yes, there are medical facilities set up by the U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force and the Marines that are land-based. But sometimes operations need to be done quickly. In most situations, if somebody is wounded in the Middle East, they're given initial surgery at what you would think of from the TV show MASH, and then they are airlifted out to Ramstein, the hospital of Ramstein, Landstuhl, in Germany, for major surgery. But major surgery can also be done on vessels like this. There are 2 of them in the U.S. Navy fleet, one based in Norfolk and the other in San Diego. So they can go in and be right there offshore when a battle is going on. But that has not happened very often in recent years. Both ships have been used more for humanitarian reasons. Let me stop for a moment and just discuss the Comfort for a minute. She's located in Norfolk. That's her home port for the ship's company. That's the folks that operate the ship. The medical personnel are not in Norfolk, Virginia. They are located in Washington at the Walter Reed Medical Center. Yeah, that's the place the president goes when he gets tested or he had COVID-19 or whatever. It was previously the Bethesda Naval Hospital. The 2 of them combined into one, and they're now at the old facility of the Naval Hospital. It is not logistically favorable to take the people that are stationed there at Walter Reed and bring them down to Norfolk to do the necessary training on board so that they're prepared to deploy. So the ship comes up the Chesapeake Bay, and periodically you'll see it moored not far from I-95 and the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel. They can come over on a bus or several buses, do their training on board, and go back to Walter Reed. This is another Naval Marine Corps facility. I like to think of it more as a Marine Corps facility because it is known as the Little Creek Amphibious Base. Again, this is in Norfolk, but it's now out along the Atlantic Ocean. If you look up in the left corner, you'll see some nice sandy beaches and waves rolling in. This is an area where the Marine Corps and the Navy train to operate landing craft and the Marine Corps infantry that needs to go ashore to conduct their mission. Today's landing craft are nothing like the LSTs that came ashore in Normandy. They're hovercraft. They come in and they go right up on the beach. The troops don't need to wade through the water to get to shore. They can roll their armored personnel carriers right off of these hovercraft and engage in battle. The Army troop on the right, can't see his insignia, but he's probably a major or a captain in the U.S. Army. And he is here to train at the School for Mid-Grade Officers called the Joint Staff College. It's a school for Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard mid-grade officers. I had the privilege of attending this school. What do they do? It's more focused on providing support as a mid-grade officer to senior officers in planning various operations, to planning whatever the service needs to accomplish. This is NATO headquarters, North Atlantic. Wait a minute, I thought NATO headquarters was in Brussels, Belgium. Yes, it was, I know. I worked there for a number of years. But what most people don't know is that NATO has a headquarters in the United States, located in Norfolk, Virginia. Why? We want it. We need it. It's responsible for coordinating. All those flags you see there are countries that have NATO naval forces. And this organization coordinates primarily with the Atlantic Fleet on how to defend the North Atlantic and Canada and the United States. So that's admirable. But has it ever happened? The answer is yes. NATO has a clause that every member signs up to, and it states that if one nation is attacked, all other member nations will come to the aid of that nation. NATO has invoked that clause once. It was when the United States was attacked by terrorists on 9/11. But wait, those were all aircraft coming out of the sky, commercial aircraft. They were going into buildings. That's true, and that's the sum total of what it was. But on 9/11, the United States government and NATO did not know whether that was the full extent of the attack on the United States. And so this entity, as well as the Atlantic Command, put a blockade for days off the coast of the United States and Canada to make sure there weren't any terrorists or any other boats intending to do harm to the United States. This is Virginia Beach, a beautiful beach, nice and sandy. A lot of tourists come to Virginia Beach. It's from as far away as New England. New England beaches aren't nice and sandy like this. I can attest to that, having lived there. It is a great place to vacation. They don't have a wooden boardwalk, that is a cement boardwalk that goes for many miles. But if you notice just to the right of the boardwalk, there is bike trails. It's a little bit too commercial for me most of the year, but after all the tourists go home in the fall, it's a great place to visit. But it's always a great place to be along the ocean and along seeing some beautiful waves. This is the end of my presentation, a bit long. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please stay in touch. This is how you can get in touch with us.